So, all right, first of all, welcome to our event. I am Efimis. I am the organizer, co-organizer of the Flutter Greek community. And we are organizing this event with Kin Carta, Greece. Well, yeah, people are joining. Sorry for that. Thank you all for joining. And as I said, it's really appreciated that you joined from different time zones. So today, a little bit about me. So I am currently the CTO of OneRoof. It's a New York-based startup about urban communication, and you can find more on our website. So about this event, we have Simon, who's going to present a use case of Flutter and how he and his team managed to create an application like an e-commerce. Was it e-commerce? Yeah, e-commerce application in about 2 months, like from scratch, which is really impressive. And looking forward to see, what they faced. And after Simon, we have Chris Sales, who is the product manager of Flutter in Google. And we have an AMA session for him. So you can ask your questions. In order to ask your questions, you can either write it on the chat, but specify for whom the question is. Specify like it's for Chris or it's for Simon. Whenever, like, if you have a question for Simon while he is presenting, just write it up, and I will gather all the questions and ask Simon in the end. If you want to ask the question yourself, just put it there in the chat, and then I will give you the opportunity to ask the question yourself. You don't want to write it down, but just so that we can have a way to organize the AMA. Let's do this process. You can, if you want to, you can utilize the Q&A functionality in the activity section of Google Meet if you want to. I will check both. And yeah, without further ado, I will give it away to our sponsor, Kin Carta and Thanos, who is representing the company.
Thank you very much, Efthymi. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining the meetup. And Efthymi, thank you very much for allowing us to be part of the community as well. So, I know that we're all interested in Flutter, and I'm going to quickly present what we represent, Kin Carta and Kin Carta Greece, which is non-Flutter thing. So I'm going to be as quick as possible so we can get to the gist of it, and let my good friend and Flutter whisperer, Simon Lightfoot, present a few interesting stuff for the audience. So let me just quickly start by presenting my screen. That should hopefully work. There we go. Can you all see my screen? Any thumbs up?
Yes.
Oh, cool.
You should be able to go full screen.
Oops. You know what? It's fine. For the time being, it's fine. So, Kin Carta, building a world that works better for everyone. I'm going to whiz through as fast as possible. I've got my contact details. Feel free to ping me any questions, any invites on LinkedIn. Quite active on there. So, let's crack on. Kin Carta. We are not here to talk about changing the world. We're here to make it work better for everyone. And fundamentally, what we represent, we are 1,600 plus digital specialists across 4 continents, 11 offices, including Athens. And we are trusted by the world's biggest brands, things like brands like B&Q, RBS, Citi, quite a few different banks and financial services under our portfolio, to essentially bring business critical services to life. So we do end-to-end product development, digital transformation, and in general, we get into the modernization infrastructure and how can we leverage essentially different capabilities from different organizations, augmented and blended with ours, in order to bring all the different propositions to life. This is the portfolio of services that covers the digital breadth and depth. We've got different communities of practice like strategies, product owners, delivery, a lot of engineering communities of practice, QI, design, pretty much the whole shebang. What sets us apart from other agencies? One is definitely the speed to value. So we've refined our ways of working and are pretty good at delivering the V1 to market or soft launching. Our outcome-driven approach, I'm going to elaborate a little bit further about what does that exactly mean, but for anyone interested, it's called the ODI framework, outcome-driven innovation, and our deep and relevant expertise when it comes to mobile. That's how we started as a company, building essentially native propositions. We apply, this is the outcome-driven approach that we're talking about, jobs to be done specifically or otherwise called. We're trying to find essentially in the customer context any problems and pain points and the desired outcomes they're trying to achieve. We focus a lot on users and we're quite user-centric because our philosophy is that by solving genuine problems, then essentially the revenue comes in from a business perspective. This is a good example of how people hire products or services to help them achieve the outcome. So a coffee is the means to an end, outcome being I must wake myself up. Apart from this, our process in general, we deploy what we call the discovery and the production phase. Discovery consists of what we call the triple diamond, where we're trying to understand a little bit more into the problem space. We diverge and converge back into review, entering the conceptualization stage, elaboration, and getting into the production phase with continuous releases of valuable chunks of software to solve genuine customer needs and obviously ladder up to business objectives. Apart from this, as far as stack and tech is concerned, because we are essentially a consultancy, we are tech agnostic. We've got many different communities of practices and we engage and try to essentially seek polyglots when it comes to engineers who are happy to change a few frameworks and understand different business contexts as well. Obviously, Flutter is one of the big community of practices and they remain focused on, guess what? Flutter. Our core technical practice and principles, in general, I think this is no surprise to anyone when it comes to principles like open standards, modular architecture, and incorporating NFRs early, as well as practices when it comes to pair programming and code reviews. We're a lot about testing, automated testing, unit testing, integration testing, and how do we build the CI/CD pipeline, fully automated, and things like behavior-driven development, test-driven development, and domain-driven development. Apart from that, we structure our projects to minimize dependencies. So at every opportunity, we're trying to keep software shippable, components-based architecture. So we've got the granularity to deploy and scale at will. And one thing, which is much more about co-sourcing our teams with the client. We're blending together in order to build those product propositions and bring them to life. We provide support and experience across the full stack. So from architecture expertise, APIs and backends, and team alignment, we usually deploy cross-functional teams in order to essentially manage the product, the project, the scope, but also add value to the clients as far as the ways of working is concerned. So the question, what are we doing in Greece? We set a rather simple vision for Kin Carta Greece here, and that is to become the best company to work for in Greece in 5 years' time. The reason for that, why? Well, because there's a lot of talent and opportunity in the market to create something awesome. By that, you have to understand a little bit the context, and especially because we've got an international audience, When it comes to key stats, I'm not going to cover all of them, but essentially when it comes to the lowest employability in EU in 2020, we were fourth in tertiary enrollment when it comes to university degrees in 2019, English literacy, and we've got a good time proximity with most European hubs. So that means we've got essentially the supply, the market has good caliber candidates due to high demand of educational qualifications, proximity we discussed, and we also actually think there is an opportunity to offer people the right working environment to flourish. Plus, big investments, if you haven't heard, from Amazon and Microsoft to the tunes of $1 billion each, tax incentives for businesses and people, startup acquisitions to the tune of hundreds of millions of euros. How we're going to try and achieve our vision? By investing in and creating the right conditions for what matters most, our people. That is where essentially we're saying we've established the values around ownership, empowerment, collaboration. If we've spoken on the phone, we had a chat about Kin Carta Grace, pretty sure this resonates and reminds you of some things we've discussed. We essentially have community of practices that we see all new employees essentially being integrated into the existing structures so that they can develop further their own skills, best practice, learning, and develop in general. And we've defined all this employee value proposition around employee needs and desires, specifically around fully remote offerings. So as long as you're a tax resident in Greece, that's absolutely fine with us, whether you are on a mountain, island, or wherever, 25 days leave and flexible times. And just quickly, because I'm conscious of time, more than happy to speak to you on a one-to-one basis, have a chat. For now, all I can say is we're hiring a lot. Have a look, check us out on LinkedIn, Kin Carta, location Greece. I think we've got 13, 14 job ads right now. We need more than 50 people. Feel free to contact me, linkedin.com/in/Thanos Gkavos for more information. And I guess, thank you very much. And thank you. Looking forward.
Thanos. Really interesting.
Thank you.
All right, so I guess Simon, you can take it away now with your talk. So just before Simon starts, whoever wants to ask a question to Simon, either wait until the QA and raise your hand if you want to ask it yourself, or put it in the chat or in the Q&A section, activity section of Google Meet. That's it. Simon, it's all yours.
So Thanos, do you want to run the slides? That'll keep me hands-free. So actually, Thanos, do you want to talk about the client, the tool station itself?
Yeah, 100%. So I guess I was lucky enough to be working with Simon now on a really, really interesting project. It started back in March. So we're going to talk about Toolstation, who's the client we've been working on. Toolstation essentially is a business that has the brick and mortar model, so many different shops across the UK, specifically around 500. But when the slide decides to switch, then there we go. So 500 UK stores. They've got presence in 4 different countries, and they've got a pretty impressive revenue number, 633 million in 2020. And essentially we were called in to essentially achieve 3 different things. 1, build an awesome e-commerce app with a frictionless experience, customer experience, leverage new technologies to scale and reduce maintenance cost, #cross-platform. 3, create a valuable product that people actually want to use. And that was through the conversations we've been having about products launching and essentially not finding any traction, any market fit. And this is where I'm going to start with the project timeline. I'm going to cover discovery, hand over to Simon to talk about the rest of the interesting stuff. Project timeline, we started with the discovery. Discovery is essentially back to the triple diamond. Week 1, we looked at any existing designs and interactions and any gaps that we had to fill in as far as those are concerned, which were plenty between us. Then understand the business environment and delivery risks and interview with key stakeholders. Week 2, we started defining our ways of working, the cadence. We had a cross-functional team of a designer, full developers, Q&A, and I was the product and delivery lead, working with Simon on a daily basis, and essentially tackling things like how do we coordinate and gain an understanding of the high level as is tech architecture, and initiating the what we call the API gap analysis. What is going to get us to the end goal? And we rolled out the cadence. Simon, anything I've missed?
So, no, I don't think you've missed anything. I think we'll talk about. I think the first major target of discovery is to de-risk any potential high priority concerns, right? So you want to head off, and there's a whole process. There's several different mechanisms you can use to do this, but you want to identify what are the client's major concerns, how to address the highest, what do we consider the highest priority issues that we need to address to make sure that we can deliver on time. So, I mean, from a developer standpoint, any external vendors and partners, they have their own production schedule. So if they've got they're a potential source of delay. So if you're communicating with any external company, that is any SDK, any platform, any service, you want to make sure that you refine that first. So you want to make sure that you're ensuring that you have from a sort of a tech lead perspective, you want to have the overall picture of how you're going to integrate those different services into your product. If there's any holes in what you need for the product to work, then you need to then address that first. So that gives the external company time to perhaps address bugs or give you feedback and tell you how you should be doing it, how you shouldn't be doing it, what the proper process is. They might have some failings in their documentation that you need to understand, best practices using their SDK, things like that. So yeah, always try and identify those issues first. And you obviously want to plan as much as you can, right? But realistically, any development project I've been on, you can't plan for everything because there's a rat's nest of really fine details you can get down to, right? And you just can't plan for that up front. So to get an estimate on time on delivery, you need to obviously identify the risks. So, and with this project, one of the big high risk things was we want to ensure that we pass Apple Pay and Google Pay approval, because within, they say, we've got to have it out by this date. Well, then, yeah, those two things are a very big source of delay. There's a potential that, Apple might just say, no, you're not going to release this product the way it is. You need to make these changes. So yeah, you want to make sure you get those kind of things out the way as soon as possible. I think, in this case, the client itself was providing the back-end system. So they've actually got a team of developers that are doing the back-end API that the app backs onto. That retrieves product API, product information, and so you can submit orders through that and some the usual kind of stuff. So what Thanos was talking about with this API gap analysis is the term we gave to essentially saying this is what we want to. We got our designers building something during discovery, saying this is what we want to build. We get approval, and we say, okay, what does the API provide, and what's missing, right? What is the gap between these two parts? So we want to make sure that the API provides all of the data necessary to display the design as per, spec'd out. But also, conversely, you want to make sure that the API is providing a succinct way. So what you don't, there's lots of APIs that end up going this route, right? And I want to just talk about this briefly. You'll have a system where it's like, get order. I'm just going to give you order history as an example. Get order history, and they give you all the order IDs and maybe the brief description of the order. And then there's a separate API which is get order information, which you then have to call for each order, right? Now that's a perfectly reasonable API, right? But then what would probably be nice on a mobile perspective is to have a paginated API which gives you 10 orders in full, right? And this is more about like the back and forth and the overhead given to the connection and various other reasons. But it also means that when you go to the next screen, you're not seeing a loading spinner, right? You're not going to get that delay in the user interacting between these very two tightly controlled components, right? So that the list view and the detail view. Also, a good example is out on tablet when you want to put them side by side. Okay, of course, you don't want to switch orders and have a delay, right? So there's a reason to choose the two different models, and it's all about analyzing what the design is and what the API gives you and trying to feed back to the backend team what they should be changing. And we're doing that as soon as possible in the process. That gives the backend team enough time to get to those points and fix whatever they need to fix and you know, whatever they can to bring the API into alignment with what we need as a vision. Yeah, I think I could talk hours about this. I won't carry on. So what's next on the docket? I don't know. Oh yeah. So I mean, this is just like an overview of the timeline, right? So we did a lot of estimations, and we had a hard target deadline of we have to launch on this date. So there's no matter what we did, there's only so much you can fit in that time. And the question was, what can we drop? What is the priority? What are things that we have to have in the app? This all goes on during discovery. So we, after much back and forth, Thanos, I'm sure, can agree to this, with the client and with our own team and everything else, we kind of ended up with a self-imposed deadline of trying to get the approval process with Apple Google started by the 26th. So that is the fourth sprint. So these are weekly sprints, by the way. So there's not a lot. This is a very, very tight deadline. And with a very small team as well. So this was a lot of powering through, I'll tell you. Anyway, so yeah, so it's interesting though, and I'm just going to talk about this a little bit further. The Apple approval process is basically approving your app. So your app has the entitlement. Sorry. Has the entitlement for Apple Pay, and in doing so, when it goes through the review process with Apple, when you submit your app for review, Apple then do the extra step to review Apple Pay, right, and ensure that it's compliant with all their policies and UI guidelines and all that kind of fun stuff. This also means that you have to have a certain minimum set of functionality, right? So from this, you end up with obviously from a perspective of an e-commerce app, we obviously need the client to be able to log into their account so we can attach their order to their account. So we've got authentication, right? So log in, log out. Then we've got a general sort of search of product catalog and being able to access their product details. And then once you've got those product details, then you want to add them to your shopping cart or trolley or whatever you want to call it, and then proceed through the process of confirming the details for delivery, let's say, and then making the payment and letting the user know that their order's been confirmed, and then providing them with any status updates about their order. That's the general flow for the app. I know it's quite brief because there's a lot we're trying to get through. So, I mean, the other side to this, so I'd say the big concern was Apple Pay, Google Pay, and then also the external payments provider, right? So I tell you right now, I've integrated payments a lot, and do not try and do anything yourself. The least you can do, the better it is for you. And that's not just a perspective of development time, which is one of the reasons why we chose the way we did, and I'll talk about that, but also from a perspective of legality and what's the word? I can't remember. Well, anyway, the point here is you are held liability. That's the word. You're going to be held liable if you're handling any card information, right? And there's a whole process, PCI DSS, which stands for Payment Card Industry something standard. I can't remember what it stands for now. But the point here is that they have a whole set of guidance that you have to go through. And if you handle any card information, you have to have policy in place. You have someone that reviews security policy. You have to have best security practices. You have to have a security agent. You have to have pen testing. You have to do a bunch of things to satisfy the legal requirements for being able to process card information. This is something you do not want to touch if you can avoid it, because it's expensive and it's time consuming, right? So that's why it's really nice to use one of these payment gateways that already provides a lot of these services for you. So I'll call it Stripe. Stripe is a very popular one at the moment. You know, you can buy into their service. They provide you a simple set of APIs, and they will handle all the card information. And the key point here is when you input card information, it needs to be sent directly and interface directly with Stripe in this case, or the payment gateway. This means you're not touching it. This is a problem with Flutter. This is a problem with Flutter because we render our own UI, and you cannot therefore take if we're rendering our own UI, we're handling that card information and passing it off to Stripe, right? This is then means that we need to be compliant. So we have two in the Flutter app. You have only two options. One is WebView, right, and the other one is native UI provided from some SDK from the payment gateway. So in the case of Toolstation, they're using a payments provider that is called Braintree. That's PayPal's payment gateway. I don't know if anyone's heard of Braintree. It's quite popular. It's quite interesting as well. Their website is very uses like a typewriter font. It feels very and it's got a style all of its own. You think, is this really PayPal? But yeah, no, it is. Yeah. Anyway, so they're using that system. That's great. And they can integrate that with their back-end platform. Great. We've got that solved. However, on the front end, how do we solve that with Flutter? Now, I know I'm talking a lot. I've got a limited amount of slides. Preparation is not my key. So we'll get on to some examples of this. Anyway, so we set ourselves some lofty goals to get Apple approval and a working e-commerce app by that 26th mark. Well, we missed it by a week, so that's not bad going in our timeline. But you know, there was a lot going on at the time, and one couple of things that we decided to do at the very beginning was to meet that deadline. We decided to use the customer's mobile site that they have for the product details page. So the product details page is what we call the PDP, which is just the initials for product details page. So you might hear me refer to that. We also have another initial, which you're going to probably hear me mention, which is PLP, which is product listing page or the search results. So they're two of the common components. And so the product details page and account management is just going to be a web view. This allows us to get it approved by Apple and then work on those two components after the fact, right? So this is one of our trade-offs that we made at the very beginning to say, we'll get it working one way, and then we'll rip that out and replace it with the actual Flutter native UI. This means that we can be assured that we're getting the approval we need before we go to launch, so we don't get a launch delay. So, okay. Yeah, so as you can see here, we've got submission by Google. We missed it just by a fraction of a week, and then we got our first alpha out. And I'll go through some of the trials and tribulations probably in a bit. But we ended up. I will just mention that there was a lot happening. And at that last week it was the bank holiday. I remember this is the bank holiday weekend at the end of May. And there was we brought in a few more developers just to literally power through and do some bug fixing, and we got through like 60 bugs in like 2 or 3 days. So you know, this was power through. But we got a soft launch. We got to meet our soft launch deadline. We got the app out there. They released it internally to all their stuff. It's publicly accessible, but they released it internally to their staff. And we got some internal feedback, and then we did some more bug fixing, code base cleanup, and then it went out to market on the 19th of June. So this is exceedingly short deadline. Now, during this entire phase, entire phase of build, we had design working simultaneously with development, working simultaneously with backend, and it was very much sort of like just sharded approach. Just we get the design come in, we get it built, we already have make sure that we have the backend in place to do that, and it's just power through. Here's the set functionality we need, get it done, and hope we meet all of our expectations. So I don't think we ended up with anything out of the app. I think at the time, I think we actually, oh no, I tell you what, so okay, I will mention this, just give some information, doesn't matter. There's a component of the app which is called trade credit, which basically has a trade. If you're a trade account, let's say I'm a plumber and I want to buy some tools or parts or pipes or whatever, then I might buy into a trade credit account. They'll give me credit, and then I pay them the invoice at the end of the month. That kind of standard business account stuff. So there's a whole system in that for paying with trade credit, and obviously you need to manage and see that credit in the app. So when we launched, we actually launched with a web view. Am I right? If you remember that, Thanos, we launched with the web view for the managed trade credit, and then we switched out at the end. So that was the only component that we just couldn't make it in on time for various reasons. So I want to talk about the next bit. Thanos. So I've tried to cram a lot in on this slide. So apologies. I don't have that many slides, but this is the model that the app uses. It's a model that I personally sort of just molded over the years. So I was doing something similar in the Android days. So I was doing 10 years Android dev, and then the last 3 Flutter. 3, 4. Good question. Anyway, so this I mean, I call it. I've seen domain-driven design, and I think there was Reso Code who's done some really good stuff on YouTube about that. It's a very similar pattern, right? So the idea here is each layer can access itself and anything and the layer above, right? So in this case, we'll go bottom up. The red layer, the widget layer, can access the blocks in the state layer, and the state layer can only access the repository layer, and then the repository layer can only access the service layer. You do not skip a layer in that chain. So it doesn't matter if you're just forwarding on a function, right? You're going to have that function exist in the repository layer, right? This allows them to be tested independently of each other. It gives you sort of a nice separation of layers. Another thing that I do a lot, and in this case, the service layer is literally that. It provides the service to the application. So it's immutable. When I say immutable, I mean, it's not strictly immutable. They might have like a HTTP client in there or something like that, right? But it's more about the fact that it's not holding any long-term state, right? That's done in the layer below. And this allows, I just found that this allows that kind of sort of flexibility so that multiple components can access one service if required. We can go into that in a little bit. And I kind of, the repository layer, I kind of split into two sets of components. We have the repositories and we have the managers. So the difference between the two is, I think you can hopefully by the example I've given here, like Auth Manager manages the authenticated user. So that might hold the state, the currently logged in user. I have a stream for that for the rest of the app to use. And we'll call the login logout APIs provided by the API service, for example, right? Whereas the product repository will actually cache the product across the application. So for example, we're on the search page, and actually I'll send you guys right now. I don't know if you've seen the app. I'll take you through the app in a minute, but if you want to install the app, I'll put the Google Play and iOS links in the chat. So we'll be talking. I'll show you the app in a minute, and we'll go through some bits of. We'll talk about a few pieces, and then I'll do some live coding, I think. And it'd be good to hear everyone. If you've got a particular component of the app that you're interested in how that was achieved, or got a question around how something was done, feel free to put it in the chat. And then when we get to live coding, I'll see if I can rustle up a quick demo of it. I will not be showing the code of the actual application. So that's the only caveat here, but I'm quite a quick typer, and I'll probably open the floor up so we could have a little conversation whilst we're doing that if we want to fill some time. So back to these layers. So yeah, so we've got the sort of that's sort of 3 layers. So we've got the service layer, repository layer, and we kind of got this front end. And with regards to the front end, honestly, any state management it doesn't bother me. Get X if you really, really want. You've got block. You've got I don't know, tons of them, right? Like it doesn't really make much difference, right? The point here is just that you're separating your business from your widget layer. And it's just, I don't make all your widgets stateless. That's just ridiculous, right? They can have their own state. You know, you've got a progress bar, have it hold the state of how much progress it's got, or checkbox, have a boolean. That's not what it's about. It's more about keeping your business logic in one place, and you can test that logic independent of your UI, right? So yeah, so these are the sort of layers that I'm going to be working with. I will show you some of this in action. I think that might be fun. Yes, I think we can switch over. I'll switch over. I'll screen share and show everyone the app for a minute, and then I'll do some live coding and talk about a bit more about some structure of the app. But please, yeah, put your questions in the chat, and we'll see how far we get through them before Chris arrives. Okay, let's see now. Has anyone actually tried the edge to edge yet? We actually use that in the app, so I can show you that working if you're interested. The new edge to edge. Let's see. I will. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'm going to share. So I can share the emulator window. So this is the current production app. Yeah, I'm gonna. That's fine. So right. So let's have a quick nose around. So we've got some banners, popular categories. All this content actually on the home screen here is done through a remote config, allowing the client to adjust what promotional material, what categories they want to promote on their home screen of the app. So they get to change all this content. The top selling and recommended products for you all come from there's a recommendation engine that's used, and yeah, these are just like banner banner images. So if I type in the search here, we can type in drills, and it will give us some suggestions and some categories and some products. If we just search for that will take us to the product listing page, where we can see each individual product and you know, whatever offers, change the quantity. This actively all listens, so can't get 3 for collection because they don't exist. So we can add for delivery, simple snack bar, and then we can also apply filters for, you know, price ranges and all that kind of fun stuff that can all be done through here. And then also ordering if we want to. And this does pagination, so the further you keep scrolling, and it will keep loading more and more in as you go. We've also got so that's like kind of just like search, and it keeps a track of your recent searches and all that kind of fun stuff, so you can return. That is accessible from the home screen here as well as the search screen. Same component, actually, just reused. The key point is just to provide search immediately on the home screen, and with a sort of a top level UI like this with the main nav, it doesn't make sense to tap on a button and scroll over and sort of do some interaction. It's just simple enough just to replicate the UI on the 2 screens. So there's also this sort of category-based view where you can, it just simply takes you into the PLP and pre-applies a filter for that specific category. So it's just a way of accessing content further down in the app to find what you're looking for. They do have very varying set of products. Some of these are kind of interesting. So paint, for example. So this is the product listing page. When you tap on, you get the product details. I just want to talk to you about a few points. We've got, obviously, got the standard sort of obligatory. This is branch collection only because paint is maybe a controlled substance in that kind of sense, or in this quantity. So they want to make sure that, you know, you're over 18 or something like that. So they ask you to come into the, I'm just assuming that, I don't remember the reasons. It might be too heavy for delivery. That also happens. And then in here, you'll get things like the safety data sheet that you can browse and download, and various like panels and fun things. They also do, I'm just going to show you one other thing whilst I'm here. It'll be the one place I can't find it probably. Landscaping, this one. Outdoor buildings. And as you can imagine, you can't get like a shed for collection. So this is like delivery only. So there's an interesting set of problem space in here, like what sort of options and how they get supplied to the user. There's also a whole ratings thing. Apparently no, haven't got reviews for that product. Let's try lawnmower or something. Yeah, chainsaw. Are there any reviews for chainsaws? There we go. So you get all that kind of fun stuff happening as well. Right. And then once you've added some products to your, I don't know if you noticed this takes on this, like each tab has its own navigation stack that remains. And when you retap on the navigation item, it resets the stack. So it's an interesting slight modification to standard bottom navigation. And then once you're in the trolley, you then get to proceed through the purchase flow or get quick trolley code. Of course, when I demo, it doesn't want to work. All right, well, leave it for another time. What else do we have here? Sorry, branches. Yeah. So this is Google Maps plugin, sort of standard stuff. And then, you know, you can choose a branch and get directions to it, or, you know, see its opening times, address, anything like that. And finally, yeah, there's a whole account section which lets you, you know, scan your customer ID when you go in store and manage your details and your order history and contact customer services and all that sort of fun stuff. There's also actually there's a plugin that also uses native plugin for like live chat, and that will make a chat bubble when you talk to someone that will remain on top of the Flutter app. I think that kind of covers most for the most part. A lot of this is like these are all markdown, so we can like put links in and images and various other things.
Someone don't forget to mention the stars across Play Store and Apple Store.
Oh, I mean, so there is a last slide actually, but yeah, no, it's worth mentioning that at the moment there's been 120. So since we launched this 19th of June to now, so what, June, July, August, September, about 4 months. I know we've had 123,000 downloads, so not bad. An average rating of 4.8 stars, and there's been over 100,000 transactions, 103, 105, something like that, transactions done through the app. So not bad going. I think that's pretty good for all done within a year, right? So let's get to some fun stuff, shall we? Let's get to the interesting. This is enough talking about an app. So yeah, if there's anything in here that you feel like you're kind of interested about how it was achieved, I will run up an example. I'm honestly free to open the floor to
Simon, we have a kind of a request if you want to
Sure.
mention a bit about caching more. You can.
Caching, is there a particular thing they were talking about? Or
well, there's just a question that I think it fits in here just before you close. Maybe if you can, it's like briefly mention about caching. It's asked about, it's asked from M and A. So I don't know. And it's not something specific, just about, I guess, you know, the architecture and where caching lies.
well, so one of the interesting things that we did with the app, I'll talk about a couple of little properties. So one of the common practices in Android apps is to use, and there's two things about this. So there's caching is temporary, and then we have also persisted state, which is permanent, as it were. That's state that you're managing with the app on purpose. So one of the interesting things that a lot of people do in these two things is to use shared preferences. So the shared preferences plugin is literally not in any of the apps I built. And there's a reason for that. And the reason for that is it makes it multi-platform. It goes off to each different, first of all, you're communicating through a plugin and through a platform channel to then communicate to a native platform to use their restricted way of storing stuff. And for example, on Android, you then say like set string, and then that takes it and it writes it to an XML file in the user's directory. And it has a whole set of other problems around caching and behavior and the things on Android. So you've got a whole pipeline of problems that you just introduced when what you're actually just trying to do is save something to the disk, right? Save something into memory so that later when the app starts up, you can retrieve it. Well, what you've just done is store a file. And since most of your objects in your app are hopefully JSON serializable or something similar, freezed, whatever it might be, then you can simply JSON encode those and store them as a string, right? And write that string to a file. Now you have a JSON file. And when the app starts up, load that JSON file back into the in-memory objects. And what you've just done is persisted your state, right? Simple. You don't need anything crazy, right? That's like, honestly, it's like 4 lines of 2 functions, load and save, right? And if you're clever about the way that you do the save, and there's actually a technique we use in this app, which I can go into if you're interested. And that is, we have a model object, which is a change notifier. And then we have a state storage mechanism which listens to that object. And whenever any value, we have getters and setters in there. And whenever any value is changed, it notifies the state management. It's the wrong term. There's so much state management. App state manager. And what that does is it actually starts a timer. And then when that timer expires, it then exports that model to JSON and stores it on disk. The whole reason of having the timer is it's I call it debounce timer, but the practical purpose is you might change multiple state in very quick succession, and you only want one disk write, right? The more disk writes you do, the slower it gets, and they have to be serialized to make sure that you're not writing over previous state that's in there and some other things. So it's just easier just to debounce, and that is you create a timer, you cancel that timer before you create a new timer. So you always got the most recent timer, and after the expiration period of, I don't know, 3 seconds, 1 second, whatever it is, you write it to disk. This ensures that no matter what you do in your app, it just stores it to disk. And now you've persisted some state. So when your app starts up, it comes back again. Coming back to the cache part, that's a very similar process, right? So you've got different systems of cache, right? So depending on the layers in which you're communicating, for example, you could put a cache on your service layer. So let's say you've got an API service via HTTP. You could put a HTTP cache in there, something like, I think if you're using DO, you can use DO Cache Manager. And what that will do is that will then store the responses and manage the cache headers and a lot of other stuff. That's great for certain practices. For the most part, though, you then have to, whenever you want to load that up, you're still making your request potentially, and then you're still having to deserialize those JSON objects. So there's an extra layer of complexity involved. Depending on this sort of repository model, in this case, products are used across the app, right? There might be multiple places where the same product appears. So we cache it in memory using a simple, what's it called? Oh, now I can't remember it when I want it. The Quiver package. I don't know if anyone's actually used the Quiver package, Quiver. It has a really wonderful, the one thing I can't remember what it's called. LRU map. Sorry, LRU. I'll type it in the chat. Oops. Anyway, that's least recently used. And basically the idea is that the more often you access something from the map, by its key, it moves it to the top, and that way anything that falls off the bottom. So you can normally have, depending on your this is an in-memory cache. So depending on your restrictions, you might say, I want only 100 items in memory. This again means that as someone uses your app, it builds up these items in the memory cache. They can instantly retrievable because they're in memory, but it's only when they're not being used, so that the person's using the app for a long period of time, do they get dropped off. So it's about looking at and working out those cache limits. So in this case, we can do a thing where we go around and say, how many products are we seeing on screen? How often are they repeating? What is the size that feels right? And the thing is, you're going to get, you can report on those statistics and understand exactly what the restrictions are and what makes sense. But to be honest, you could store quite a few models in memory and not have a lot of memory be used with Dart. So I think there's a 64 byte overhead per object, which is just not a crazy amount of data at all. I've done a lot of talking here and I haven't got to any examples. So what I might do, I see Chris has just arrived as well. Oh, look, Spade Tree map, yep. What we could
Simon,
do,
we also have quite some questions for you.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's get to questions. And what I'll do, if anyone's interested in this architecture pattern I was describing, I was just actually putting together a sample that I was going to go through on stream. So I'll finish that off and I'll post it up, and then I'll give it to Ephemis to put on the Meetup notes. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. Cool.
And if this is a recorded video, we'll post in the description, all that sort of jazz. And that way you can kind of see it in action. And I'll do like JSON placeholder website and have a service that fetches it and show you some caching happening there. Let's go through the questions, I think. All
right,
sorry.
Great. So I will just go through them quickly. There are quite some questions, but from chronological order, let's say. So M&A asks, can you speak briefly about API error handling on Flutter? Also, could you suggest a secure off-platform framework that works with Flutter, other than Firebase Auth?
I mean, in this case, we used the backend provided system. So the backend actually had their own authenticated platform, which is actually based off of standard OAuth 2 tokening. There's zero. Is it Auth 0? Auth 0 is another one that you can use. That's a open provide. I think they have a open a free package as well as a paid package. Honestly, I don't have any specific one that I would recommend over another. You could honestly read up about OAuth 2 and the sort of bearer tokens and how they work. There's standard packages that deal with decoding them and using them that don't make it too difficult to actually use in a practical sense. Yeah.
Okay.
And that's what I'd say about that. What was the other half of that question quickly?
So the first half is like error handling, and the other half.
Yeah, error handling with APIs.
So the first part is that the one you didn't answer yet.
Oh, well, I mean, quickly, error handling with APIs. So I tell you what, I've seen. We were discussing this last hump day, which was like using either and host like sort of a tuple sending back. So you've got like an error state or a success state and some other things. I'm perfectly fine with throwing exceptions. And then as long as you catch those exceptions at some point and don't just capture all exceptions. One of the biggest problems that app developers have is they want to capture every exception to stop the app from crashing. The problem with doing that is you don't identify the errors then, right? You don't know when an issue occurs, especially when it's in the wild, right? Like you can't just say catch all errors and then display a message on the screen. Sorry, it didn't work. I mean, that's not very helpful, right? You need to be able to log those errors at least. So, yeah, overcompensating on error capturing is quite a common practice I've seen going around. So I'd say throw your exceptions, and then when they get thrown, catch them in the right places. And I think during those layers I was talking about, I let the services throw errors, and I let the repositories managers capture those exceptions and deal and update their state accordingly. And then once that state updates, they might throw an error event out that the UI then displays an error appropriately. In this app, we have a top level component that displays the snack bars at the bottom of the screen, and that listens to the overall app state. So when something emits an error event, it then receives it on the front end of the UI and displays the appropriate error response on the bottom of the screen. Sorry, go on. Yeah.
All right. So the thing is that I see like a lot of questions here for you, but I know that Chris has a limited time to be with us. So if you're okay with it, can we switch to Chris and then back to you? Okay, that's perfect. So so for all of you that asked questions to Simon, he will answer them after Chris. And so we can switch to Chris. So Chris Sales is the product manager Flutter in Google. And we have some questions in the Ask Me Anything session we're going to have. So welcome, Chris. Nice to have you here.
Hi, thanks. And just to be clear, I am one of a team of PMs. Flutter is too big for just the one PM.
But you are the PM that we have here with us. So
that is true. I am the PM that's present for sure.
All right, great. So I have a question from Dermes. I'm sorry if I'm butchering names. I'm trying my best. I don't know if Dermes is here. It's a question from Twitter. So the question is Flutter a long-term prospect, or it will be one of those projects which Google will shut down in the near future because of Jetpack Compose or KMM? That's a question that I hear a lot, but I would like Chris to answer.
Well, at this point, so I mean, just to be clear, the use of Flutter is both internal and external, right? We have more than 30 engineering teams using Flutter internally, our Smart Display team, Stadia, GPay. Just based on that alone, I couldn't cancel Flutter if I wanted, right? Flutter is so deeply used, and the usage is growing at Google that it's here to stay. Let's be clear. But then you look outside and the incredible growth of Flutter in the Google Play Store, you know, Flutter, the number of Flutter developers that we continue to see in our numbers. You know, it's a very popular, successful framework that we will not be canceling anytime soon.
Thanks. Thanks for clearing this out for a lot of people, I guess. So Braj also, he has two questions from Twitter. So the first one, is there any roadmap to add more capability to Dart so that it can become a good candidate for backend dev?
Yeah, that's a good question. We actually have one of the, I belong to a team of Dart and Flutter PMs, and one of our PMs, Kevin Moore, has been doing a lot of work on enabling Dart for the back end so that you can build, you know, full stack Flutter apps. And in I/O, he showed off, hey, you want to use Dart with Cloud Run in a container and build a server with the shell framework. And I very much recommend that. In that same time frame, we also released a package that provides Dart wrappers for something like 180 Google APIs on the Google Cloud platform. So yes, we continue to push on that. Me personally, I'd love to be able to even take, you know, the manual deployment out of it and just, you know, write Dart that ends up in a, you know, in a cloud function, right? And deploy it with the rest of my app and test it locally with emulators and et cetera. I think that would be a pretty cool feature. So I don't have any dates or milestones to announce, but yes, we do have a PM looking at that work. He's very passionate about it and has been making great progress, and I hope to continue to see more progress.
All right, cool. So the other question of Raja is the flame chart of raster thread in dev2 performance profiling is still a bit cryptic to understand. Any plans to add filters to it, like the ones added for CPU profile? And yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. We are constantly, we understand that you know, when you're you know, debugging increasingly large Flutter apps. Actually, we continue to be surprised at how big these Flutter apps are getting. And so we're constantly pushing on dev tools to build tools to handle bigger and bigger apps and handle more and more cases. We understand that as we add capabilities to dev tools, it doesn't always come across in the most easy to use manner that we would like it to. So we are constantly working to improve it. And in fact, in this most recent release, Flutter 2.5, we did a bunch of polish on dev tools, and we have more planned. For those specific things, hey, I look at this flame chart, I can't tell, make heads or tails of it. It actually really helps to have specific issues that says, here's what I'm looking at, I don't understand it, here's the kind of information I'm looking for, can you please help me? The more of those kinds of specific pieces of feedback we can get, the better we're able to polish the DevTools UI and make it more usable.
Right, cool, thanks. So another question is change notifier more performant than set state? Well, I don't know, we're going to this question, but
okay, so I have multiple answers to this question. The first answer is, I don't know, maybe Simon knows. We'll keep this for Simon to tell us the specifics. The second question I will tell you is they're both doing fundamentally the same thing, which is they are marking a widget for the next frame to be rebuilt. They're just setting up a bit on the widget. So they're going to be very close to my hypothesis, and Simon can tell me if I'm right or wrong. My hypothesis is that from a performance point of view, they're very, very similar. But that is the wrong question. The right question is, what is the right architecture for my application? Set state has a very tightly coupled, the knowledge of the data and where that data comes from into your widget, which in some cases it makes tons of sense, right? If you've got a text editing widget and you want to have a text controller in that widget, set state makes a ton of sense. If you are pulling in data from the network and you're watching that data for changes over time as the results of the network change, or as one part of your app makes changes that another part wants to show, then set state is completely inappropriate. That is way too tightly coupled. You just from an architectural standpoint, you'll want to use change notifier or some other kind of notification-based API, just as a way to separate the concerns from your app, and only worry about the performance when you get to the profiling phase, and you say, gosh, I'm somehow sending a storm of notifications or whatever your profiling uncovers. But yeah, I mean, perf is not your biggest concern when you have to make the choice between set state and change notifier.
Cool, thanks. So from the chat today, we have M&A that asks, any plans or news about SEO with Flutter?
Actually, I'm going to refer you, Miriam, who is the PM specifically for Flutter Web, just published a big roadmap all about what's coming in the near and longer term future. You can look on the Flutter channel of Medium, and she's got a detailed list. We have work to do before we get to SEO, mainly because, thank you, Simon, that's exactly the right link. Mainly because the thing that we think that Flutter is best at is not websites, where SEO is hugely important, but web apps, where SEO, if you're using Rive, which is a web app, or Supernova, which is a Flutter web app, or all of the pretty great kinds of education things you see out of Google, or just the huge the huge number of websites that are where you can go and get to Flutter apps are apps, not sites. And so SEO, while on the list for the roadmap, is not the next thing we're doing for Flutter Web.
All right, That's cool. And we have another question, which is actually directed to Simon, but I would like to ask you the same one. It's from Akash, one of our attendees. And the question is, what happened to Navigation 2.0? What's your thoughts on that?
So Navigation 2. Simon's laughing. I have no idea why you're laughing, Simon. Navigation 2.0 was all about deep linking and making sure that we were exposing the capabilities that you needed for both mobile and web for the navigation chores that we know you have. And so Navigation 2 was a great success from a capabilities point of view. However, there was some problems with the complexity of the API. People were having trouble making it work the way they want. And so for that, I would recommend there's several kind of custom router projects on PubDev. If you just go to PubDev and type router or custom router, you'll find several projects, packages to provide a much easier to use declarative full-featured router solution, custom transitions, and nested navigation and deep linking and dynamic linking and so on and so forth. The community's done a really good job in terms of stepping up and exposing the capability of the Navigation 2 API in a way that is much more easy to use.
Right, great. So I'm out of questions. So if anyone wants to ask a question, they can raise your hand, and you'll have the opportunity to do so. Okay, I have a hand. Let me unmute you. Oh, you have to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hello. Good afternoon, evening, yes, based on the timeline. I have a question. This seems like a silly question, I guess. Like, have you used Rive animations in a production app? And also one more, which is like sort of a roadmap or courses which you've been, to get started on Flutter, to have to follow, to dedicatedly follow to, become a Flutter developer, I guess. Yes.
Yes. Me personally, I have not built apps with Rive, mostly because I'm kind of a lower level plumbing kind of guy. I kind of like to build packages and plugins, and apps are a way for me to have an app that, oh, I need a thing. Let me go build a thing. That's more fun than the app. But for sure, Google production apps have used Rive. In fact, GPay uses Rive for their animations. In terms of learning resources, I definitely still, the thing where I learned Flutter was the App Brewery Flutter and Dart Bootcamp course, which needs a little bit of updating. It doesn't cover null safety, but other than that, it's still a really great course on the core concepts of Flutter. There's also a couple of books I recommend. The Flutter Complete Reference book is really great. It covers both modern Dart and Flutter, and in fact, the first 200 pages are all about Dart programming. And then there's a brand new book out called the Flutter Apprentice book that the team quite likes as a good way to get started with Dart and Flutter. But I would say that it turns out the internet is filled with great ways to get started with Flutter. Certainly Flutter.dev, our docs, we're pretty proud of. There's lots of great tutorials there. The DevRel team for Flutter is second to none, top rate. Plus they're doing, widget of the week, videos, which are fantastic, package of the week, materials, which are fantastic. They have the boring show, which is really fun. You get to watch real Flutter devs write real Flutter code, which is really fun. So plus when you get to the next level, kind of the intermediate, type Flutter search, any old Flutter search into google.com, and you're likely to find some article from some member of the community that has something useful and interesting to say. And often you'll have multiple choices of that kind of content. So, tons of resources to get started with Flutter and Dart, and tons of resources to support you as you go. One of the links that Simon posted there is a great site or a great page on Flutter Dev, which is all about kind of community places to go, right? Slack channels and Discord channels, the Reddit, the subreddit for Flutter, all super handy as a place to go and ask Flutter specific questions and get great answers, as well, of course, as Stack Overflow, where we have actual team members watching Stack Overflow for popular questions and making sure we get answers there. So lots of places to go to learn about Flutter.
And also, as everybody mentions in the chat, we have Code with Andrea, who's with us, right? She also posted some very cool videos about Flutter.
Cool. Hey, Andrea. I've seen a bunch of your videos. Nice to meet you. You're muted.
Oh, you're muted, unfortunately.
Oops, need to remember the mic. Yeah, I was silent all night, but I think most of the stage was well deserved by Simon and your guys. So good job.
Here's a little secret for everyone. Me and Andrea worked on the same project in the same office once.
Yeah, it was a long time ago.
Long time ago, right?
Yeah.
That's cool. That's cool. Thank you. So, anyone else have a question? Like Andrea, once you have the stage now, do you have a question for Chris?
No, I think everything that had to be explained was explained, and indeed, I think all the links that are already being shared. That's so much good content that can address so many of the questions people may have. So, yeah, just checking out those goes a long way.
Right, cool.
Just to follow up a little bit, I was making fun of Simon for laughing at me during the nav2 question, only because I myself have an opinion about how best to do navigation with Flutter and nav2, and I turned that opinion into a package that I released earlier this morning. And so it's called the Go Router. If you're interested in checking it out, you absolutely can.
All right, cool. Thanks, Chris. Definitely will. Yeah, so Simon's very quick on links in the chat. Thanks. So anyone else have a question they can raise their hand to ask a question. Anyone? Going once? All right, I guess everything was okay. We have one. You can unmute yourself and ask.
Yes, again one to Simon. You're stating about the challenge you faced while connecting with Stripe, I think, the payment thing, because Flutter is the UI which we create, I guess. So you had an issue with that. Can you explain a bit more detail on that? The payment way, I guess. Yeah.
Sure. So this is not a failure of Flutter at all. This is more about how payment systems work, right? So when it comes to payment, you don't want to be touching the user's information. So you don't want to be in any way handling the data for their card number, their security number on the back, the expiry date, any of that information. You want that to be handled directly with your payment gateway. This takes you out of the loop of liability. So if someone's card stolen, number stolen, then the gateway accepts it directly. It's nothing to do with your application, right? You can literally, there's no way that you could have been involved. So part of that process, as I said, is to either show a web view in your app, and that web view hosts the web page that the payment gateway provides you, or some web content, iframe, who knows what. Or and normally the better approach is to integrate and create a plugin, or if it doesn't already. So there is actually a Stripe plugin. I'm not sure if it. I think Stripe have got a front-end UI plugin now, official one. but something that where you can say, make payment and it pops up with the appropriate UI. And in fact, saying this just reminded me, there's actually a package called Pay, which is made by the Flutter team, well, Google, should I say, which actually lets you integrate with Google Pay and Apple Pay in your Flutter apps, right? And that literally does it the same way. They integrate with the standard SDKs for Apple and Google Pay, and you make you perform the action saying make a payment, and then it shows up the Apple Pay UI or the Google Pay UI, and that's completely not your UI. It's shown on top of your Flutter app, completely outside of your scope of security and control. You have no say, and then it returns you a token that you pass back to your API that is used for payment. So there's never, in any point, do you ever see any of the kind of information you don't see on screen. It's not used in any widgets. You're completely out of the loop, and that's where you want it. Also makes your life a lot simpler as a developer because you only ever handle the token, right? You say make a payment, and you get back a token, and you validate. Your server validates the token with Google Pay and says, "Oh, it's valid. This is for this information or this amount of money or whatever." Right? Simple. So yeah, I'd say. Does that kind of explain what I was saying? I hope that answers your question.
I guess you did. We have another question from another raised hand from M&A. You can unmute yourself and ask. And then we have another one waiting.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Just a quick question to Chris and maybe also to Simon as well. Whenever Android Studio / IntelliJ team, they push an update to the IDE, immediately my Flutter installation breaks. And then I hurry to Stack Overflow or GitHub to see what's happening, and it's usually a problem with some folders of Java or something like this. So is there any kind of permanent solution to this? Because this is an issue that I have with every Android Studio update. Thanks.
Is this, I'm going to quickly say, is this with the same project? Is this always on the same IntelliJ project or Android Studio project?
Yes. It's one project I've been working in since Feb. Yeah.
So I would suggest you delete your .iml file, which is your project files, and your .ida folder. Close the IDE, delete them, and then you say create new project from existing sources and choose the folder. It probably means that your project actually is not initialized correctly anymore. I also would suggest that you right-click on the Android and iOS folders and choose exclude folder. That will stop the analyzer from trying to analyze, including the standard Java analyzer, from analyzing that folder. They're separate, they're literally separate projects, right? You can open them up as separate projects. So when you have them as just folders in your project, it will confuse things. So I always mark them as excluded in IntelliJ. If you want them to be picked up correctly, you need to install them as modules. So you can choose a subdirectory as a module in IntelliJ and say it's an Android module, and it will appropriately do the right syntax highlighting and everything for you. That's what I'd recommend. I mean, to be honest, I've never experienced the same problem that you're having. You will get, whenever you upgrade IntelliJ or Android Studio, you will tell you a warning that the plugins are out of date because the plugins are built for the specific version of Android Studio or IntelliJ. And each different version, so each different release of the Flutter and Dart plugins have a minor version for each different distribution of Android Studio and IntelliJ. So yeah, you always have to update, but it's just a update restart should be fine.
Great, thanks, Simon.
All right, great. And we have another question from Pavia. I hope I didn't butcher your name. You can unmute and ask.
Hi, I am working on video calling app. In that, I wanted to implement that when the call will be coming, like in background, then the sound is not coming. So how can I implement it?
Okay, so who are you asking this question, Simon or Chris?
Anyone can answer it.
I can give you something if Chris, you don't want to say anything. So the running Dart in the background is not straightforward. So there are several packages that help. One of them I'd suggest is called Worker Manager. Allows you to run Dart code in the background. But essentially what you're trying to do is when you get probably a push notification, you want it to execute some code in the background that then pops up with some UI to tell the user they've got a phone call, for example. This is all very much native platform at this point, right? That interaction with the user is happening outside of your application, right? So whenever you do that, you're now dealing with Android. For Android, you're dealing with iOS, specific way of doing that for iOS. Now, then, if there's not already a package or plugin available, you're going to have to go learn about how they work and how you do that natively. There is a nice section on the flutter.dev talking about how you make your own plugins, and you can make your own plugin. What I would normally do in this situation is create a subfolder in my project packages, and then create my plugin inside there, and then use that as in your PubSpec YAML, you can say local path dependency and choose the local package, which is quite nice. But yeah, the work. So you've got Work Manager works, I think, on iOS and Android to do stuff in the background. But for the most part, you can also do things like, I think, if I remember rightly, the Firebase messaging now supports background messages, and it will run dark code in the background. So that will also work for you. And if you mix, and for your specific situation, I'd say if you mix Firebase messaging, dark code in the background with local, I think it's called local notifications, you can pop up what's called a full screen notification, which is where it starts an activity on Android specifically at full screen. So that's how a phone call happens. So when you get a phone call, it fires off an intent and then pops up with the full screen activity with the yes and no, accept and deny button, right? That's how those apps work, and there's a permission for it and stuff like that. But that's the way I suggest you do that. Other than that, you could display a notification with 2 buttons on it, and that's also you can also do that with local notifications as well.
So let me just build on what Simon says. We know when it comes to background code and interacting with the user and notifications that this is hard to get right. So we have built a bunch of documentation for messaging and local notifications and etc. All about how to get it right, how to write code that can work well across both iOS and Android in this case. And so I recommend the firebase.flutter.dev. That's where you'll see all of the Firebase plugins for Flutter, and you look into messaging specifically, and you'll see all kinds of docs and samples all about how to solve this specific problem, because we know it's hard.
All right.
For learning this native development, which resources are best?
Sorry, what did you say?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I cut you off a bit there. So can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, for learning this native, this background task, which resources are best to learn with in Flutter?
So you're asking for English resources or for non-English resources?
For Flutter.
Sorry, it's a bad connection. We're not getting any.
Yeah, it's correct. Can you write it in the chat and then?
Yeah.
I think the question is about, hey, what is the best set of non-English resources? I know that there are a bunch of Chinese companies, Alibaba, Tencent, et cetera, that have been publishing a bunch of docs and samples and packages for Chinese language speaking. And so I would recommend checking those out. Also, we make sure that all of our release blog posts are translated into Chinese as well, so that Chinese speakers have access to that information. I don't believe that there are, Simon, I don't know if you know better than that, but I can't think of any other non-English, big set of Flutter docs.
So I do remember, and I don't quite remember if it's what the website address is, but there is a translation of flutter.dev website in Spanish. there's a Spanish community, Espanol community that completely translated all the Flutter documentation into Spanish. So that might help if you're a Spanish speaker. And apart from that, I'd say I'm sure you could find it if you look hard enough. There's also I think reaching out if your question is about more like, so I think, I don't know what country you're from, but there's several Indian-based communities that do stuff in Hindi and various other languages. So there's also some Arabic content out there as well. So yeah, I mean, it's all over, to be honest. I think can't think of any one specific reason, because a lot of the stuff I'm looking at is in English. So yeah, apologies, but hopefully that helps.
Okay, we have another question from Joan D. You can unmute and ask.
Hello. So thank you for your time. Very insightful. I have one question regarding test automation. I was trying to test the following scenario. User taps on login with Google. The native screen of choose your profile appears, and then the user is redirected to the dashboard, for example. How do you mix test automation through the Flutter framework and test automation through Java, Android, or iOS native controls? Do you have any pointers on where can we look? Thank you.
Yeah, so for Android, essentially the way to solve that problem is to write a native test script that also can drive the Flutter parts, and you can do that with a plugin that you find a pub dev called Espresso, which essentially provides the Flutter integration into Espresso for native Android testing. We are also working on a native iOS solution for that to solve that same problem. We haven't shipped it yet. Simon, can you think of any other kind of native testing solutions that support Flutter?
Not off the top of my head. I mean, you can't drive. The point here is you can't drive the native code. Well, it depends. So in this situation, what I normally do is test the plugin, which runs the native code independently of the app, and then you're testing the channel. So you're testing 3 components, but I've never really done an end-to-end test. And doing an end-to-end test, as Chris was saying, you have to come from the native side to call to tell the Flutter code what to do, and then that's going to call back into the native code and complete the entire chain of events. Yeah, I can't think of any specific package apart from the ones you've already said.
So I'm sorry, everyone, but I have to drop off. It has been a pleasure to hang out with all of you, to meet Andrea and to see Simon again. It's been too long, Simon. But I have to go. Thanks very much for having me.
Thanks, Chris. Really appreciate it. Yeah, I really appreciate your time.
Right.
Bye. All right, so I guess Simon, the other questions are on you.
I'm going to stick around for another half hour. So should we go back? Should we go back through the questions and see if there's any that we haven't?
We are actually having one question, one hand raised right now. So I don't know. Maybe you can answer that question. Brahmanyan. Hope I didn't butcher it too much. Okay, you can unmute and ask.
Yes. So I have another question actually. You made an app in 2 months, right? The tools station. So if you had say sort of like a 6 month, I think, I don't know what's the latest deadline for making such an app. What sort of animations and transitions would you have implemented? That's what I want to know. Yes.
So I mean, that's a great point. I mean, one of the things that we want to do as an improvement into it is to add some nicer transitions. In fact, we actually removed some in favor of not having to fix performance problems before release, right? So there's, I mean, what was it? What type of animation, or how would you do the animation? I mean, for a lot of that, for example, there's a new animation. I say new. It's been a while. It's been out. There's an animations package, which goes a long way to fill in the gap between this is the action I'm talking about. It goes a long way to fill in sort of the gap in the animation sort of framework. But for the most part, you can use a lot of the implicitly animated widgets in a nice way, where your state updates and just automatically transitions. And some simple ones are like there's animated size. So basically, if you switch out the widgets on the inside based on the state, it will nicely sort of expand and collapse. And if you add a fade to that, you can do some really nice sort of simple UI transitions. When going with the bottom nav, you kind of want to transition left and right. So some of the simple things to do that is to use. So I actually, I might see if I can find a link for this. I made a page view with cache, and basically what it is I extracted out what page view does horizontally, made a custom widget, and then I added the cache extent parameter to the base scroll view, and this means that you can then cache 4 or 5 pages worth of content, so that you can then put that as your top level. And when you say switch page, next page, previous page, or jump to page, and it animates, there's not reloading those widgets in and out, right, and losing the state. You can also do that with automatic notify client mixing. What's it called? Keep live. Sorry, automatic keep live client mixing, which means that it will keep those widgets state around even though they get scrolled out of the slivers that they're in. But I'd say one of the most underutilized mechanisms of animation is route animations. So I did a talk on this a long while ago, and I'm gonna just put one little line of code in the chat. I believe it's this. This lets you get the current route and get the animation controller for the current route. So if you start your route up with a page route builder, for example, where it doesn't do the material route, does the material animation. If you don't want that animation, you want your own custom one, then use a page route builder, give it a duration for the transition. And what you can actually do is set several of your, you have several widgets, size transition, animated opacity transition. These are actually, I think it's called opacity transition is the widget. Something like that. I think the size transition, they're all ending transition. And then what they do is they accept an animation. And what you can do inside your widget at the top level page, for example, you can, in your did change dependencies, do modal route of context animation and build 3 animations or whatever for size, different components. So as the screen comes in, you can have different components doing different things. Like the background fades in as the top comes down, and some really nice transitions, all from material route.of. And you can just do that piecemeal inside of your UI. It's very powerful. Yeah, very underutilized in love apps.
All right, cool. Can switch back to the questions that we had before. So the navigation question was answered, I guess, by Chris. And another question from Aris, I guess that was answered as well, which is your advice to junior Flutter devs on how to proceed with their Flutter starting, what they should dive into first, and what should they be their first steps. We have a bunch of links in the chat about that, but Simon, if you have anything...
I'm going to briefly mention that I'm so far away from the beginner stuff. I can't put myself in the beginner mentality. Does that make sense? I look at something and I think of the solution. I can't put into not knowing about these things. I can't put myself there anymore, which is a shame. But there's lots and lots of beginner resources out there. Lots done by the community. So, I mean, I couldn't give you like, here's a, curriculum of learn this first, learn this, and this. I mean, I came at Flutter from already knowing about mobile development, so I already had a lot of background knowledge. So I'd say just immerse yourselves in the SDK, right? The SDK documentation, api.flutter.dev, is phenomenal. It is so much information. When you come across a widget or a class that you don't know about, or you see it in some code sample somewhere, go to the documentation, read it. If you don't understand the concepts, that's fine. Go read up about those concepts. If you still don't get it, carry on, because what's going to happen is once you've read enough, things will start, the puzzle piece will start coming together and go, oh, that's because that happens and that happens, right? And as you start bringing more and more knowledge, into the picture that you have in your mind of how things work inside the framework, you'll get that bigger picture and it'll come together. But yeah, it takes time, right? There's not just read something and bam, I know all about it, right? Like practice, right? That's the end of the day, right?
Okay, cool. So Subramanian asks, did you already have boilerplate for authentication and card interactions? I think this was asked live, right?
Yeah, was this one? I don't know. I didn't know. So
no, it was about the authentication package, right?
Right. So what this question was saying, do we already have boilerplate for dealing with this?
Yeah, for authentication and card interaction.
No. So first of all, this is so the card provider Braintree didn't have a package themselves. They only had their SDK. So we built a plugin for Braintree that enabled the app to use the drop-in UI, which is part of their sort of UI for entering card information. The other side of that is so that involves making a custom plugin, and that has its own set of constraints around native, having experts that can do the Android or iOS specific parts potentially. There's obviously a problem around learning. So if this is your first time, you're doing Flutter, you've never done Android, that's it's a big learning curve. It's a completely different language you're dealing with. So the best way I could say about dealing with that kind of problem is go look at the other packages that are out there. So specifically the first party Flutter plugins, go look at how they did their plugin. See how, look, so they pass the method call in here and they check this and they do that. That's how they get that data. You start piecing things together. But yeah. Look at code by example, right? Go look at the primary source. That's your source of truth. Obviously the documentation as well. But they're very complex topics. That's where some of these tutorials can come into, where it talks about how you debug like a native plugin when doing Flutter and some other things. There's quite good talks out there. What was the other? There was another bit to that, wasn't there? Payments and authentication.
No, it was the authentication and the card interactions.
Yeah, one thing that people can't get right. I did an example of this, and I'll see if I can do it with this one, and that is the whole idea of managing logged in state in an application is still something that people have trouble with. And don't get me wrong, once you've got the pattern down, it's pretty straightforward. But having that pattern down is the first thing. So in that architected sort of diagram I showed, where we have a service and we have the repositories and managers, and then we have our front end UI. So you might have like an account block that monitors, that listens to a stream. And in fact, this is actually how the app works. It listens to, we have RxStart, and we're not, I think it's just a behavior subject that reveals a value stream to the UI. And then the UI, a widget on the UI can then say, oh, if the user's logged out, show this state of the UI. If the user's logged in, then show this other state of the UI. So we can then show the sign-in page or the login page or the account page, right? Simple switch like that. And then because that auth manager ends up being a singleton in the app, that state is managed in one place globally. That's the source of truth for that throughout the application. There are other ways of dealing with that. And for example, is listening. You can emit events on a stream and then have your top level widget that holds material app, listen to those, and then call the navigator to clear the stack and show the login screen and do various things with the navigation stack. This is so much easier with Navigator 2.0. Highly recommend you go look at the Go router, for example. I think has an example of this. I may be wrong. But that whole idea of the navigation state, the state of the application mirrors the navigation stack, right? So you update your state and refresh the UI, and all the stack, the navigation stack changes. Right, that's a very important distinction in the way that Navigator 2 is different from Navigator 1. I also do a talk in Navigator 2, which you can probably find, which I talk about that more. Anyway, I'll shut up. Go on. Next question.
All right. So we have a bunch of them. And I don't know if you have the time. Let's see.
Let's see how far we can get.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll try to keep my answers short.
From Samith, during discovery, did you start with UI UX and then map API needed? And was there an easy way to transfer UI wireframes to Flutter? And another part, which is, what was your CI/CD pipeline for the app submission? So it's kind of like two questions from some.
Okay, so let's just have the second part, the CI/CD pipeline, right?
Yeah.
So we're actually so we've got the project is the Git repo is actually on Bitbucket. It has Bitbucket pipelines which allow you to spin up a Dart instance and run your local unit tests. And you can also we also spun up some stuff to do integration tests with CodeMagic, and then the CD is actually CodeMagic for the deployment to the app stores. So there's tons of information out there about using CodeMagic and using how to do unit tests, and you'll find GitHub actually is more accessible to beginners. So GitHub, the Dart team actually made a GitHub Actions, so you can really hook up when I commit some code to this branch, start this action up, that spins up a Dart instance that runs these unit tests, for example, right? You can do all that kind of stuff, and that's your CI. And if it doesn't pass, you can actually set up in GitHub that you can't merge that branch or that PR until it passes the tests, right? So that gives you some assurances that it's quality code. And then with continuous deployment, again, move a branch, cause an action that can then spin up your whatever the services that's going to be building your app. I'm just quickly mention that Gitlab has a nice feature which allows you to host the build server on any computer. You just run their software, and so if you've got only your local machine and you don't really want to have to keep all the stuff up to date, you can actually host like a VM for the build server. And then whenever anyone in your team does something, it goes to the one machine and builds on that machine, which is kind of handy. It also keeps it private, so no external company has access. Banks require this, for example.
Yeah, I've used actually this feature of GitLab and one of my previous jobs, so it's very, very handy.
What was the other half of that question?
So it was the first half. It was like during discovery, how do you start from UI, UX, UI, and then you map the API, and how you transfer UI wireframes to Flutter.
So actually, the client already had some initial concepts done. So we already started with UI, and we actually had a great designer, Abby, still working on the project actually, and she went ahead and took all her many years of experience working with UX and took what their conceptual was and made it into an actual product, right? And that was done through Figma, was the tool that we used. However, it literally was, look at Figma, it says it's 46 dip high, we're going to make the widget that high or something like that. I personally would recommend, that's a really bad example, I would not put fixed heights in there, but that kind of like that notion of just take one and replicate with the other, and that comes with practice and speed. I've seen some of the tools that generate code, and at the end of the day, is once you generate once, you then want to modify it. So you then go, well, and then I'd set aside my modifications if I want to re-export it with some changes, and then I have to re-implement those. There's several ways and packages around this, but they all have their pros and cons, and a lot of them limit your use of UI, or limit your interaction with the UI. So you're sort of doing sort of an event-based system. Yeah, depending on what you want to do. If you truly want to make a custom app, you do it all yourself, right? Like it's hard work. That's what you're being paid for. So
just quickly to add something to what exactly Simon was saying. So from a delivery perspective, initially we said design's gonna work in a -half sprint fashion. So we've got almost like a runway full development. But I think the impressive thing that happened when we normalized the ways of working, we had what we call the 3 amigos session. So we were swarming in twice a week, dev, product, QI, and engineering all together, essentially to understand a wireframe or a high fidelity design, if it works, any gaps, any changes before, for example, it went back to the client. So it's almost like you need to schedule and plan a little bit ahead, but don't forget the whole swarming in. Don't forget the ceremonies and the cadence, where you get the opportunity for the entire team to participate, especially when it comes to design.
Right, cool. Thanks. I see you, Sabramian. You have to raise your hand, but I have to go through other questions as well. So, and Simon has only 10 minutes. So let me go through the other questions. If we have time, you can ask your question. Is that okay with you?
Go for it.
Yeah, no, it's not.
Oh, sorry.
I'm just, all right, cool. Yeah, he's okay with that. Let's go with this plan. So, yeah, Andrea asks, did you have to support Flutter web for this project? If not, how would you have approached navigation payments on the web?
So, yeah, so we don't support Flutter web on this at this moment in time. However, when it comes to payments, yeah, again, it's the same problem with plugins. So in this case, because we've got a custom Braintree plugin, we go to the Braintree JavaScript SDK or whatever it is, and implement the platform channels and necessary. There's actually a platform interface for web, right? So that's how we literally just write the custom plugins for the payment provider. However, currently the Pay plugin, which is Apple Pay and Google Pay, doesn't support web, but it has a platform interface. There's no reason why you couldn't implement the platform interface and call, again, the JavaScript libraries for Apple and Google. But yeah, it would be, there's obviously custom work there involved. I wouldn't personally, this is not again, it's, as Chris was saying earlier, there's a difference between website and web app. This is not a product that I would make in Flutter as a website, right? Like you want to be able to navigate. You need SEO, you especially need high SEO on e-commerce. It's not the right tool for the job. However, if it was like a management app or some admin interface control panel kind of deal, then yeah, use a web app and make it in Flutter and use payments. No problem.
All right, cool. So we have a question from both Panos and Joro. It's about block architecture. So, so do you guys use block library or block pattern? And what is your perspective of boilerplate versus clarity of this pattern? And what are the reasons? So it's a multiple part question. And what are the reasons that you choose block over others? For example, built-in observer pattern like change notifier in Flutter, or do you use both? There is MVC's a pretty solid architecture from Skinner.
Yeah. So we actually use multiple. So we're using provider, right, to essentially as an overarching mechanism, using instead of manually going with inherited widget, we're using provider to access things throughout the tree. We have a couple of global blocks, and we have a block per section, and there's some every screen at least you have as a top level block, and that's mainly about separating off the business logic for that screen and the UI for that screen. And it also means that there's like you can use provider at the top level to provide that block to the UI, and then any widget inside the screen can access the block for its functionality. We don't use Flutter block. So the pan that the Flutter block package by Felix implements is very much this. It has a stream in, a stream out. So you've kind of got this acceptance of actions, they turn into events or something, and then it affects the state, and then you have a state coming out, right? Like that is too restrictive in a lot of cases, I feel, and I'd end up making 10 blocks to do one simple thing because I'm trying to navigate that pattern. So what we simply do is just say we're using the block pattern, which is basically just a stream to the UI. So a lot of the time we'll have for example, a screen will have a state object which holds all of the variables necessary to render that screen, and that's updated perhaps at a component level, perhaps at screen level, depending on what the component, what the screen is. So the block emits those states as things change, like loading, not loading, stock level changed, whatever it might be. The events are just functions. So all we have is we're calling functions inside the block directly, right? And those are probably asynchronous functions. They go off and do everything they need to affect the state. We don't have a direct sort of event to state mechanism that Flutter block provides, but it's still the block pattern. It's still this idea of having events, having data streaming out and affecting, and that is affects the state of the UI, and the UI rebuilds to reflect that state. Another concept that we have, things like example in a deep link. So we have a separate, so again, something you don't want to do, and the reason for having these services in this architecture is to externalize any external package to just one component of your app. So for example, we have deep linking. So we have like a deep linking service that uses the Unilinks package, I think it is, for handling the deep links into the app. That's only consumed in that one place. Then we then consume that further down in the UI eventually in the block. And what happens is when the block gets those events, it then checks, is this a product link, a category link, is it this type of link? And then emits an event on an event stream. And then the UI can listen to that event stream and perform some sort of action, like taking the user to a certain screen of the app. So there's always like a control flow throughout. I don't know if that helps or gives an example of using it. But yeah, no, not strictly block pattern.
All right, cool, thanks. So, Sabramin, you can ask your questions now. I intentionally left some of yours out because you might want to ask them yourself. And I have one last question I have saved for last from M&A, and that's it, I guess.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. So I just wanted to ask one more question. Like how I have seen in apps where they make a kind of a custom resolution, say 375 by 1812 for iPhone 11, I think, I don't remember, but they remap it to take the media query from the mobile or any device, and then they remap it to that thing. Is that what you're doing in your thing? Is that what you what is usually done in this?
Sorry, you might be better if you type out your question. I'm just
All
trying to get that understanding. But I will mention it to you. We have practically 0 breakpoints. So the app does change. So things will, like the organization of widgets will change based on the screen width, right? And this is obviously so on a wider screen device or a larger font that that things will manipulate. And you can try this out when you use the app. So one of the critical points I'd say when testing your UI and trying to make sure it reacts properly is don't put fixed sizes in. As I said earlier, like if you want a button that's 46 dip high, what you're actually saying is my font is 12 and I want a padding of 8 on either side. This means if the font size changes because the accessibility size is put up, some half blind and they whack the font size to the top, the button gets larger. What doesn't happen is the text gets larger and cropped off inside the button, which makes the button useless, right? They can't read the text then, right? There's obviously, you can't do that with everything, right? Because, so you have to pick and choose where that happens. And that's more about making your app react, right? So for the most part inside the app, it's all about using the widget sizes. There's actually an interesting concept that people kind of get. I can give you an example. So there's a bottom nav, right? And let's say your bottom nav is transparent, right? So the height of that nav you can fix to 96 dip, right? Now, the problem here is, again, if you've got fonts in there, you need the nav to get higher, right? But then you want there to be a padding behind so that when someone scrolls some content, it's not hidden behind the nav bar. So somehow you need to get the widget size down to the widget behind and make sure that the padding is the right size. So there's plenty of systems of getting the data through the hierarchy, and that's like provider or whatever package you want, right? Riverpod, whatever, right? There's I can't think of how many there are doing this kind of thing, but for the most part, what I've done in this I think in this app is that we have a value notifier with a double at the top for like bottom nav height somewhere in one of the, might be in the block, I can't remember. So further down the tree, we've made a widget that listens to that value notifier. So when the value changes, it changes the size box. Now I've made a padding, a widget that I can put in the bottom of a list that will change its height based on whatever size it's given. Then when you can use a custom multi-child layout or a custom single-child layout to perform the layout. And once the layout's done, you have the size. You then update the value in the value notifier. You'd actually have to do it it's called a scheduled task. You can look up this global function, and then that way, once the layout of the navbar happens, it updates the height of the navbar in this value notifier. That notifies the UI behind the scenes to adjust the padding appropriately. I kind of gone off topic here probably, but I don't know what the original question was, and I don't. Is it in chat? No.
No. It was the question asked by Subramanian.
Yeah, I didn't know. I think it was going to type. I thought it might type say.
No. All right. So if you have no other questions, I can ask the last question.
Yeah, go for it.
So it's like from M&A, and the question I intentionally left it for last because I think it probably is a good wrap up. So just want to find it again. Okay, here it is. So after this project, can you reflect on what Flutter should improve on the upcoming versions?
Yes, I can. So so there's I was actually mentioned a few of these things. So there's actually a really good link that I was literally just sent before the talk, which I'm gonna post in the chat. So this should work hopefully. Let's see if everyone gets that. So so last Hump Day Q&A last week, I was speaking to Kevin Moore from the Dart team, and I said about this problem that we have in when you make these widgets and you have these constructors that have like 20 parameters, and you want to call the superclass, you have to repeat all 20 named parameters and their values to pass them on to the super constructor, and you end up with a lot of boilerplate code this way. And I was saying that how it'd be nice if the language had something like Python, where you just like, oh, I want to pass all the arguments from the parent class to the subclass, and it just to pass down the tree, and it all works. So I'm guessing internally, him and someone else, I think, put together this spec, which is for an upcoming. The idea is a proposal for an upcoming language change, which, if you scroll to the very bottom, means you'll be able to do like in constructors at the moment. You can do this dot. And let's say you've got a final string name as a variable inside your class. At the moment, you do this dot name, right, for this class. But in like the super class, if you extend it, you can now. The idea is with this proposal, you can do super dot name, and it doesn't just do. It passes it on, so you don't have to do that whole pass on, repeated boilerplate stuff. And I really like that. That's a really slick. And this is one of the. I was telling this to some other people. This is the power of what Flutter brings with a language of its own. We go, what do we need to make our lives easier, right? We can change the language to reflect that. And that's what's been happening with all the language funnel, which is this repo, is the language repo, where they do the proposals and they work on the upcoming features and the language itself. So I'd say that's some of the powers. One of the nice features that I'd like to see, and hopefully we'll get put in eventually. The Flutter itself, I think I think I've mentioned this with that sort of navbar example, is coordination between widgets and sizes. So when you have one widget that relies on size of other widgets, it's very difficult to do that coordination at the moment. And it'd be nice to see a mechanism built into the framework to do that on your behalf. So it's just like point and click. So that's about it, really.
All right, cool. Okay. There are some questions now in the chat. I'm going
to answer one quick thing. I'm going to answer one quick thing. And I'm going to give you a piece of code that I practically use in every app as a final thing. Let me find this quickly. Just because this is something that everyone should have. I mean, the one time I can't find it. So this is what everyone's missing. Things like this. I'm just going to chuck this in the chat as a little code example. And also things like this. These are so helpful. So whenever you want the gap between two widgets in a column or a row, you just put in horizontal margin 4, and it just that's what you get. You don't have this size box width 4 everywhere, right?
Okay.
And it's a constant, so it's one instance that's reused across the app benefit, right? Memory benefit as well as performance benefit. And the same goes with the padding. I don't use edge insets anywhere. What I end up doing is saying horizontal padding 24 or something, and you can even do the plus. So if you can actually do things like, in this case, horizontal padding like 32 plus, vertical padding 16, right? And use that as your value for padding, right? And you've achieved, instead of doing edge inset symmetrical, horizontal 32, comma, vertical. And, you know, there's some common patterns you can do with that, which are just really nice. Like, think about whatever widget you can, or whatever thing, and simply make a one file, which is your we call it actually common widgets, right? Which provides this, and then you just import that across all your UI. You can export it from one common place and import it everywhere. And yeah, you know, it cleans up the UI so much. Simple but effective. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks for sharing, Simon. I think we had some questions in the chat, but I don't know if you have the time anyway to answer them. But on this note, I would like to close off this event. And if you have more questions, I guess you can reach out to Simon directly on Twitter or on all of his channels to ask them. Thank you very much, Simon, for being here and for sharing all this very insightful information. Thank you, everyone who attended from all different time zones. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Thanos, for making this happen from your perspective. And that's it, everybody. Until next time, which is going to be next month. Just stay tuned, and you'll see another event coming up.